So let's continue with section 1 and talk a little bit about the question types. In section 1, it's usually filling out a form or filling out a table, as I mentioned before. And sometimes on some tests, it just depends. You might have to pick from a list or even multiple choice questions. But usually it's filling in a table or filling in the blanks, or a gap fill is what we like to call it. So in section 1, you'll have to complete the gaps in the form using up to 3 words. On the IELTS exam, you will never use more than 3 words. So it's usually up to 3 words. So you'll use from 1 to 3 words. And also on the IELTS test, if you use more than 3 words, your answer will be automatically marked wrong. If you use less than 3 words, your answers will be correct. So the important thing on the IELTS, overall on the whole test, is be sure not to use more than 3 words. And the other thing is you want to make sure that you're using correct grammar. So if they use articles like a, and the, if the speaker uses them, you'll also have to use them in the answer to make it grammatically correct. So you have to be careful with that. Also, you have to make sure that you're capitalizing proper nouns, like names of people, names of streets. You also have to make sure, a big thing that I see a lot of is not capitalizing the street. Actually, if you say Langha Street, you need to make sure that the word street is also capitalized with the name Langha, for example. So in that's very important. With a gap fill, it's like a completion test. So you have to predict what's missing in the gap. So when you look at the gap, if you have first name and there's no last name, you'll usually have to have the last name filled in. And usually on the IELTS task, especially task 1, or section 1, sorry, on the IELTS part, you'll have to usually do the last name. And most of the time, I would say 75% of the time, they will spell the name for you and you'll be able to listen to it back again. But sometimes they'll only do it one time if it's a simpler name, like for example the name Brown, B-R-O-W-N. So you'll have to make sure that you're knowing what's missing in the gaps. You'll need names, dates, places, times. For example, especially like I said in a hotel, you might have to have your ID number, your email address. So you'll have to look at the gap to know specifically what you need to fill out. Also, you need to completely spell the names out or the streets out. You have to have a complete spelling. If they're not, you need to spell it, and also you need to make sure, like I said before, that the names are spelled correctly. And make sure that you match the spoken numbers with the written numbers. So in other words, if you have a phone number, sometimes they'll give you the phone number like 0912 and you'll have to continue the rest of the number. So when they repeat that, make sure that you don't write 0912 again. Make sure you're following along with the speaker to write the correct numbers. Other than that, make sure that you read the instructions carefully and see how many words you need to write. Look at the form and the information, decide what it's about. Make sure that you note the order of the questions. On the IELTS, the questions usually go in spoken and written number. In other words, if the speaker talks about 1, he will talk about 2, then 3, and then 4. That's called chronological order. So make sure that you're following the speaker and following the questions along. Most of the time, I tell my students to follow along with their finger or with a pen or a pencil when they're taking the test to make sure that you're following the questions correctly. The next thing is look at the gaps and any headings. For example, this is the heading. The heading is the listening test. You need to make sure that you pay attention to headings and also any words that are written on the paper so you can familiarize yourself with what they're going to be talking about. And also, the next thing is maybe underlining key words. Like, for example, if listening is a key word, you might underline that. And using this to help you fill in the gaps. And as you listen, complete the form. And as I mentioned before, complete the form on the question booklet itself, not on the answer sheet. Remember, you will have 10 minutes at the end of the test to complete your answer sheet. Some important words to highlight are nouns, verbs, adjectives, or numbers. Those are things that you definitely want to pay attention to. Any of those things that are written on the sheet that will help you find the answer. Because if you have a noun, usually after a noun you need a verb. So if the verb is missing, you know you need a verb. If the verb is listed but you don't have a noun, then you know that you need the noun. So make sure that you're paying attention to what you actually need in the gap. Make sure that when they require a date of birth, it should be dates. In other words, a date. If your birthday is June 21st, for example, you make sure that you write June 21st or June 21, and then the year, or the opposite. And if they ask you for age, you need to make sure you write your age. So if you're 22, you need to make sure that you write down the number 22. The next thing is worth mentioning is make sure that you watch for common mistakes. Students often make mistakes with numbers. For example, on the aisles, they'll use numbers like 13, 14, 15, for example. And sometimes when you listen, you hear, instead of 13, you write 30 or 40 or 50. That's a common mistake. They will generally use numbers like that to try to trick you. Also with dates, make sure that you know your dates. In other words, your days of the week and your months. Make sure you know January, February, March, April, May, and so on. And also Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, so on. And make sure that you know how to spell those words. Some words that are definitely give people trouble are words like Wednesday. Make sure you know how to spell the name Wednesday correctly. And you'll have to know numbers, usually up to 30 in section 1. In the later sections, you might have to use larger numbers. And you can, I'll give an example of how a section 1 looks like and how you would fill in those answers. So we'll do an example in a little bit, and I'll show you what those look like. So those are some common things that you need to listen for and some things to look for. So if you do have any questions, you can always contact us, and we can answer those questions on our website. Thank you, and we'll talk about section 2 next.